When it comes to spending money, and more often than not, a lot of it, on watches, making mistakes is something that's preferably avoided. A costly missed decision has a lingering habit of returning to you just when you're about to fall asleep. A haunting reminder of that time that, yes, you spent that much on that watch, and don't you feel foolish for it? Well, as someone who's been in the watch industry for almost 15 years and has been collecting watches for 20, there aren't too many mistakes left that I am yet to make. So let me collate that error-rich history of mine for you into the biggest mistakes made not just by beginners, but by experienced collectors and even experts too. Stay to the end to find out the secret to everlasting life. Since we're going to be delivering ice-cold truths, best to wrap up warm in a lovely sweater, such as the one I'm wearing right now. The link's in the description below. Thank you for supporting me. Let's get started with what I think is perhaps the most common occurrence of any watch collecting mistake I see, one that completely misunderstands the fundamental principle of watch collecting. It's completely pointless and stupid, and you shouldn't try to make any sense of it. Yet, we beginners, as we all once were, still are or are yet to be, enter this world expecting the rationality and sense we apply to the remainder of our daily lives. If we pay more for a house, for example, we expect it to have more rooms. If we shell out a large amount for an automobile, we want it to massage our butts whilst playing Taylor Swift through 18 speakers. This is, I think, the rookiest of rookie errors, a most basic mistake more nonsensical than opening up the doors of your fortress to wheel in a wooden horse about the size of a small army. Watches don't make sense, and so trying to make sense of them is as futile as Jean-Luc's Borg-directed Resistance. How does this manifest itself exactly? By watch shopping with the head and focusing solely on specification. I understand wanting good bang for the buck, but the buck doesn't stop with sapphire crystal and hacking seconds. Some of the best value, best spec'd watches in the world have a face not even a blind mother could love. And yet there's a misplaced expectation of satisfaction, because it ticks more boxes than Disney's casting director. Buying watches is a heart game predominantly. If you're looking for logic, steer clear. That's the best advice I can give to any beginner. Step into this with both feet, expecting none of it to make sense. Or perhaps you're otherwise better off taking up pickleball instead. I get it, I really do. When you get going at watches, chances are you're younger than you will be in the future, until you see the secret at the end of this video, and that means you're more likely earning less. Perhaps you're not earning very much at all, fresh-faced and all out of cash, having spent it all on 50,000 slices of avocado toast, instead of being sensible and buying a house. And these days, there are some incredibly impressive watches available for not very much money at all. We spoke about specs, and some of these busters are packing with an authority of an open carry state. This kind of thing seems too good to be true, and in the good old days of dial-up, that would have been misconstrued as a scam. Since then, however, those Nigerian princes have all dished out every last penny. Every computer virus has been vaccinated against, and tech support has maxed out their iTunes library. Watch out for Brad Pitt though, he's definitely faking it. Cheap watches from the likes of AliExpress can actually be a solid, impressive wear. Of course, be reasonable with your expectations. Can you get a watch for a single buck on AliExpress? Yes. Should you? Well, I took the fall so you don't have to. Check out the video I made when I bought a $1 watch on my channel. Or I can save you the effort. The case was so crap it made P. Diddy's look solid. But for $100 or so bucks, you can get a pretty decent, well-spec'd watch that will make you make "huh" noises when you unveil it for the first time. But here's the problem. If and when something isn't quite right with it, which may or may not happen, then what? You're going to ship it back to China? You may find that warranty isn't worth the single-ply toilet paper it's printed on. Watch companies with local entities may cost more to buy, but at least you're protected by the statute of your country's law. It's peace of mind that may well pay for itself. I want to touch on a specific point of the sentiment from our first beginner mistake, focusing on specifications. As a person becomes more ingratiated in the watch game and better understand what makes a watch worth more or not, it quickly becomes apparent that a beginner attitude to price evaluation isn't entirely complete. It's that pesky logic again, getting in the way with its 1 + 1 = 2 nonsense. That's far too efficient. An experienced watch collector won't get out of bed for an answer of 2 that doesn't involve a quadratic equation. Because we're conditioned by sense and reason that the best outcome is one of a balance of time, quality, and cost, it's easy as a beginner to misappropriate what's worth more in the purchase of a watch. An example I like to give is the application of printed numerals versus filled. One takes a flat dial and pad prints useful numerals right there onto the surface in one satisfying splooge. The other sees those numerals engraved into the dial material and backfilled by ink for a result that's ostensibly the same. The accountant on your shoulder says the printed edition is the one that makes the most sense, but that's where sense and watch collecting part ways. Knowing the latter technique took more time makes it the one to have. It's more expensive, yes, but rated on man-hours alone, it's actually better value. That's why watchmakers hand-finish parts only the brand's heritage department will see when they harvest them for auction. There's something innately satisfying, albeit heinously illogical, about knowing your watch has had a lot of blood, sweat, and tears poured into it, more so, if literally. That means something like a Grubel Forsey handmade one, a watch that does cool but tell the time, and probably not even that well, can be good value at $1 million. Have you ever been food shopping on an empty stomach? Talk about letting the fox into the henhouse. The rotisserie ones especially didn't stand a chance. Neither did those 3 big bags of crisps, the 9-pack of donuts, a tub of mint choc ice cream, and that whisper at checkout for the drive home. That's what it's like discovering watches. Because there's so many great choices out there, it's hard to decide which one to buy. Welcome to the eternal dilemma of the watch connoisseur. Should I buy a whole bunch of cheaper watches, or just one lumpy one? A kilo of rump, or one slice of fillet? There's no wrong answer. In reality, all the answers are wrong except for save your money for something useful. But there is another factor: buying now versus buying later. The cumulative saving situation warrants less time on the sidelines when buying multiple cheap watches instead of one expensive one. That's why beginners often end up with a whole bunch of stuff they wish they'd never bought. Maybe 1 or 2 might stay, but for the most part we're looking at dead men walking. After all, dividing wrist time over so many watches is never going to yield a whole number, so there will always be a selection that are dishing out less action than a retired movie director. It can be frustrating waiting for the coffers to fill enough for a watch that could cover the cost of many. But when the ultimate price to pay is multiple bouts of depreciation, the wait is more than worth it. To round up our 101 of watch mistakes before we venture into the errors of the more experienced, it is simply to say that there are so many ways to be rushed into making a decision that's better made at a slower pace. It's hard to be patient in the face of an exciting new addition, especially when the opportunity presents itself from so many different directions. Here are just a few ways temptation might try to break your resolve. A watch you think you like is available right now, and you're afraid you might miss out. A watch you think you like is hugely popular, so you're convinced it must be good. You have the money for a particular watch you think you like right now, so you may as well buy it. That watch you think you like is surprisingly cheap, so it would be foolish not to buy it. The longer you wait before buying a watch you think you like, the longer you'll be mired by crippling sadness. The list goes on. Oftentimes, many times, and almost all the time, factors such as these can appear more important than your actual interest in the watch itself. But in reality, it's almost always nothing but a mirage. Another watch will become available. Popularity doesn't always indicate preference. Watches are cheap for a reason. Your sadness is the result of an unfulfilled existence, and a watch won't fix that. Try to steady the ship and make a decision on an even keel. Let time and experience become your ally. It is, after all, called hunting, not catching. I can't believe that my Patreons support me in the way that they do. It's like an incredible dream that I never wake up from. Thank you so much to them for making my dream a reality. If you'd like to join them, you'll find a link in the description below. Thank you. We've moved up now to our more experienced collector, however they're far from immune from making mistakes. I'm speaking from my own experience, of which a little can be a lot more dangerous than none at all. It's at this point we've been around the block a few times. We're no longer getting our heads flushed down the toilet, and our backpacks are no longer bigger than we are. It's about this point where many experienced collectors take a bit of a turn on Rolex. Once considered the absolute Mac Daddy of the entire industry, with a bit of extra knowledge injection, it now seems more like a conman tricking tourists by the bus stop. Rolex sold us shit and told us it was chocolate, the fancy Swiss kind they serve to diplomats. But now we've seen the truth. Now we know. This, I learned, is a mistake. Rolex is, as it ever was, a fantastic, surprisingly good value watchmaker of robust, elegant sports watches to be worn every day. Its popularity and ubiquity isn't its influence over the sheeple, it's just really good at the thing that it does, which isn't climbing Everest, or being the first waterproof watch, or the first automatic watch either. There's a reason why CEOs of the coolest independents have Rolexes in their collections. It's why Jesco owners daily a 911. The absolute peak can't be appreciated every day, but that doesn't mean the everyday can't be peak in its own way. The waitlists may make you rather play a little game with a tricycle riding clown puppet, but the net result is well worthwhile. Making a mistake is forgivable when you're greener than Greta Thunberg's vegetable drawer, but with a body of time in the game behind you, it's far more embarrassing to admit when you're wrong, especially to yourself. The tricky thing about a hobby based entirely on bullshit is that there's always an element of jeopardy to making a decision, and it's easy as a seasoned collector to try and style it out by pretending it never happened. Giving a watch some time to connect isn't necessarily the worst advice, but there comes a point when it's obvious you're not just in a tunnel with no signal, that this particular network simply has no coverage in your area. At that point, it's not unusual to ignore the obvious signs and keep on hanging on in the vain hope that it's all going to click into place. It's a form of the gambler's fallacy, really, with every day trying to convince yourself it deserves a place in your collection, another fat stack down on black. True wisdom is knowing when to back out. Use your mirrors, be observant, and try to do as little damage as possible. The longer you leave it, the harder it gets. Be honest with yourself and admit when things didn't go to plan, and you'll soon be back on track. And believe me, once you've ridded yourself of that problem child, you'll feel a whole lot better. The same is true of watches. The reason a little bit of info can be more problematic than a barbed toothbrush is because even just a drop delivers disproportionate levels of confidence. When you're wetter behind the ears than King Charles in the bath, you lean on the expertise of others to help inform your decisions. However, when you've notched your belt some, you'll tend to lean more on your own experience, and perhaps even offer that experience to others. But here's the challenge, one that doesn't seem to disappear even with experience. Buying watches is not logical, it is preferential. It takes a surprisingly long time for this reality to sink in, and requires a level of self-awareness to properly come to terms with. In order to recognize that your preferences might not align with the preferences of others, first it must be acknowledged that all that money's been spent on watches solely because you think they're neat. Can an experienced watch collector share their earned knowledge with those less so? Of course, but it's important to know when to tap out. And it's especially hard because beginners will often ask what you think they should buy. Make suggestions that fit what they're looking for, sure, but encourage them to make the final call. Most inquiries for watch ideas around a certain theme often yield a purchase that fits the bill worse than a busted vending machine. And the combo of a newbie thinking they'll be satiated by specs with an old hand with ingrained preferences is pretty well likely to lead to regret. These days, more than ever, when someone asks me what watch they should buy, my answer ends up being, what watch do you want? There's something so romantic about doing things for the first time. The innocent naivety, the scope of opportunity that lies ahead, the blank slate, clean of poor judgment. It's also a purer experience, singular in its purpose and clear in its goals. Find Neo, defeat the agents, free mankind, fly away to rage against the machine. There's Breitling, Omega, Tudor, Longines. It's easy. You stand in a room with bright lights, glass cabinets, and people pretending to like you, and you look around and point, and everyone claps. You get to be the hero. But with experience, you open up more doors. You become the keymaster, trying to connect tenuous pathways before two albino twins commit cultural appropriation. It's messier, confusing, and in many ways, paralyzing. Turn down one pathway to cheaper micro brands, bringing it to the big boys for much less, and you risk buying into smoke and mirrors. Commit to cool indie watchmakers and you could end up spending a whole lot of wedge on the wranglings of a madman. There's so much more to the watchmaking industry than the front window of Watches of Switzerland that I'd say it's not even the tip of the iceberg, but a frozen penguin turd balanced on the tippy top. Below the waterline is a vast continent of ice, teeming with opportunity, but the sharks are circling. Especially when it comes to high-end independence. They could take a pretty nasty bite out of you in a moment. That can lead to, well, nothing. Nothing at all. No decision. Missed opportunities, passed up chances, all because the wealth of choice is just too great. It's opposing advice to the beginners who may be inclined to act rashly. Once bitten, twice shy, as they say. And given the prices of some of these watches today, it could turn a person into an outright recluse. If I could give just one slice of guidance pie to an experienced collector, it's that there's one thing, no matter how much money you have, that you'll never be able to buy. No, not an Omega without some kind of stupid design decision. That same buzz you got when you bought your first. Going from no watch to an watch is about the biggest adjustment you'll ever make in your collecting career, because even switching up from a Timex to HYT is still a smaller shift than going from au naturel to wrist curious. There are just some things in life that can only hit right once. Buying your first watch, going behind the counter at a McDonald's birthday party, and seeing a grown man naked. From there on after, no matter how hard you pursue that mythical fire-breathing creature, the only scales you'll ever get in contact with are the ones that keep lying about your weight. Don't expect that same type of enjoyment from any other watch you buy. Can you still source pleasure from each additional purchase? Of course, and in some cases it may be even more intense. But it won't be the same. Watches really aren't so much enjoyable in their own right, but in the journeys we take to get there and the people we meet along the way. Once that fully makes sense, it's time to move on to the next category, expert. If you've managed to swerve these common mistakes, don't start now by missing out on liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And if you've made some other mistakes, tell me about them down in the comments below. We may have entered our expert level, but don't for a moment think that leaves the mistake making behind. Oh no. If anything, the mistakes made at the expert level, although fewer and further between, can be much more catastrophic. And one of those mistakes is a bit of a frog in a hot pan situation that can cause collectors to end up spending much more than their past selves would have ever believed. Price desensitization. Frog in a hot pan is the wrong analogy. More like a frog who keeps buying increasingly more expensive pans until the pans it's buying are far more expensive than any pan should reasonably be. That's not so much an issue to have an expensive pan. What am I talking about? An expensive watch. But it's easy to end up spending a whole bunch more on an expensive collection overall because the waterline keeps rising. Like any kind of hard addiction, it comes with the side effect of long-term memory loss, with only the last encounter pronounced enough to remember. And before you know it, you'll be saying things like, "Only 20,000? What a steal!" And that Patek will make a great gardening watch. My gardener will love it. Don't be like Jenny from the block and be fooled by the rocks that you've got. Another side effect of this price desensitization can be an aversion to more affordable options, which in many cases can make a fantastic addition to any collection. I fully understand wanting to take great care in filling up the watch box, knowing full well how easy it is to quickly fill it with cheaper temptations. But at the most experienced level, once those lessons have been learnt, it can be pretty easy to lazily dismiss anything affordable, rather than risk ending up with too many. We're an efficient creature by nature, by which I mean any opportunity not to get off my butt I will take, and on the basis that at the affordable end there will be more chaff than wheat, it does make sense to bypass it altogether. But doing so means missing out on some real gems that can provide as much satisfaction for a fraction of the price. It also keeps the old price barometer in check to make sure expectations are still being met. As you may have noticed, watch prices over the last few years have shot up, and the disparity between the most affordable brands and the most expensive has never been greater. It's surprising how much joy an affordable watch can bring, even if you're used to the pricier stuff. You know that weird phenomenon where, when you take a trip, it feels like ages the first time, but gets progressively quicker every time after, even though it's actually still the same duration? That's you getting used to all that new information, your noggin working overtime to collate a bunch of stuff that may or may not be useful to you. A few trips in and that info's good and in there, and all of a sudden it doesn't quite feel like so much of an overload. It's linked to the same part of the brain that makes boredom feel slow at the time but fast on reflection, and excitement the other way round. Time may tick by at 60 seconds per minute, but relative to us, it's all over the place. And so the more watches we buy, the more we're used to it, the less exciting it is, the more we look back at it and feel like it had less of an impact on our lives. That's that dragon we've been chasing, and it makes us come full circle and rush into purchases because 1. We have more experience, so less research time is needed, and 2. Because we want to get to that moment sooner because it doesn't last as long. Does that mean we should ditch all our watches and go running into the night in nothing but our birthday suits? As exhilarating as that sounds, no. It's about reprioritizing what watches mean when we buy them, who we share that experience with and how, and what we do to appreciate them post-purchase. I'm increasingly finding that my watches are, if anything, more of a matchmaker to interesting people who I like spending time with, like putting a pineapple in the window, but not quite the same, but not entirely different. It's like any fledgling thing, really. When it first gets going, it's zero risk and maximum opportunity. Things that have been around for longer, that have put down roots and become more substantial, it's harder to make a change. Quentin Tarantino would never make a TikTok, for instance. Kanye West will never think a happy thought. You get my meaning. For a watch collector, every watch in that collection is a totem of some kind of achievement. Yes, sometimes that achievement is just getting up off the couch and buying the watch, but even the ability to do that is a celebration of success in itself. So that makes clearing out the tagalongs that much harder to do. A collection that grows not just in size but in obsolescence is nothing but a mental weight, a hoarding of things that are no longer enjoyed such that they are reduced to an unnecessary burden. Maybe this is a bit magic crystals and woo, but I don't think we as people deal well with excess. Instead of it doing what we think it should, making us happier, it does the opposite. A person can only do so much stuff with so many things, and everything else that's left just sits there going stagnant. And I think it does that to our brains too, even if we don't realize it, like tumorous growths doing nothing good. If you can put on weight by eating too much, because we haven't yet evolved to understand a McDonald's won't be the last bite we have until spring, I don't think it's unreasonable to think we can pack on the mental pounds too. So I think we're better off cycling things out that don't carry any kind of sentimental value to flush us through like some kind of wristwatch enema, which I'm pretty sure was part of the Epstein Island welcome pack. If there are any pieces in your collection left unworn for quite some time, move them on. It's not easy, but it's refreshing, precisely because it's not easy. It takes discipline, and discipline, I think, is healthy. I'll tell you though what the biggest mistake is that our most expert level collectors experience. It's industry fatigue. They know so much about the making of the sausage that the sausage starts to taste not quite so sweet. They've seen the knuckle cruncher, watched the eyeball squelcher, and peered into the anus mincer. And it's left a lasting scar, not just on the anus, but the mind of its observer too. In the spirit of quantum physics, it's that very observation that has brought on change. I can tell you, I get it. There's much of the industry that sucks more butt than a chain-smoking Frenchman. I'm cynical at the best of times. I was born with my eyes pre-rolled, and there's a whole slice of this thing that's even more cynical than even I could ever muster. It's enough to make you wonder what kind of sick freak would ever even get into watches at all. And I'll be honest, I've almost quit the game entirely because of it. But I'm glad I didn't. And you shouldn't too. Because as we flush out the investment buyers and crypto bros and flex lifers, we get back to what it's all really about: community. Wristwatches tend to be a Pied Piper for a certain type of person, people who I often admire, respect and trust. And I wouldn't want to miss getting to know a single one of them. And really, that's the secret to everlasting life. Not by immortalizing yourself, but by sharing quality time with others. Your physical body may end up as nothing more than ash scattered into a crowded beach. At least that's what I want. But your memory extends on in the minds of the people whose company you enjoyed. Well, there's that and whatever ridiculous fountain of youth contraption Musk, Zuck and Bezos are almost certainly up to. And remember, if you feel like you just can't get watch collecting right, that's not because you're doing it wrong, it's because you're thinking it wrong. The big mistake there is doing any thinking at all. See you next time.